Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptonomics brought to you by Withum. As always, I am your host, Mark Eckerly, and today I welcome to the show Chris Groshong, president at CoinStructive. So we're going to do a deep dive into your history, your company, kind of how you got into the crypto space, which is always like where I like to start these episodes. But welcome to today's show, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Good to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So let's dive in. I always like to start with introductions, but also your rabbit hole experience into crypto. How did you first get introduced to digital assets? And tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, uh, I was introduced to Bitcoin back in, I want to say maybe it was like the end of 2011, and it was a conspiracy theorist friend at the time who was telling me about it. So I didn't give it a whole lot of, I didn't give it a whole lot of understanding. I kind of looked at it as like, wow, this kind of sounds like a Ponzi. Um, you got to have more people to get in for this thing to really take off. And then about, I want to say like a year later, I started looking into it again. So like the end of 2012, and then again at probably about 4 months after that, it was like March of 2012, and that's when I realized, oh, you can't you can't shut this off. You can't turn off Bitcoin. And if you can't turn it off, then what's going to happen is innovation will spur around it. That's exactly what happened with in the .com, with the internet, and pretty much every other influential technology that we have. Always, especially if you can't turn it off, innovation will spur around it. And I was like, well, this will be this will be um, a new place to play, a new place to generate wealth, a new place to go out and be adventurous and see what happens. So I was looking for a way out of my biotech job, and I didn't see a really great a whole lot of options because of my skill set. And so when I found crypto or Bitcoin specifically, I was like, no one is really that much farther ahead of me, um, except for like the developers, which I'm not planning to become a developer. Um, right? And then there was the attorneys, right? And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to become an attorney either. But those were the folks. It was either that it was only three folks really when we got started, right? It was the attorneys, it was the devs, and it was the crypto anarcho-capitalists who wanted the banks to just disappear and wipe out everything. So I knew that was not going to be a path because the people who have control never give up their control, and the banks and the financial institutions definitely have that. So, but there was always going to be a training wheels kind of period where there's going to be this bridge, and I was like, look, if I can get in now and I spend all my free time, like if I was going back to school, right? Like what would I have to do? I'd have to work. I'd have to keep my job. I have to still pay the bills, but I gotta get this new skill set. So all my free time, weekends, evenings, um, I would take vacation days and go to conferences. So I was committed to like this industry and becoming a part of it. And I wasn't sure exactly how I was gonna get there, but I knew that I was going to. And so sometimes determination is the most important.
And I think I've heard from a lot of people. It's a similar story, but it's one of those things where you go all in, right? It kind of envelops your entire world with crypto. You can't just be half in, half out, because it's a space that's moving so fast. I mean, I was the same way. I knew when I hit a crossroads in my career at a certain point, I knew I wanted to stay in crypto. It was just a matter of what direction within crypto did I want to do that. Um, so
Yeah.
it's neat to hear kind of the early mover space, especially when, right, you had a friend and you thought it was Ponzi, this fake internet money, and now we're seeing today 12, 13 years later, new tokens popping up left and right every single day, and we're just numb to it at this point. It's just expected, basically.
Yeah, it's there was no crypto, it was just Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
right? So There was no crypto Twitter. It was just Bitcoin Twitter, and that's where I met a lot of people, because people were everywhere, and there wasn't a lot of in-person gatherings back in like 2013. My first conference was in 2014 in San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure Vitalik was in the corner working on Ethereum at the time. He was sitting down on the
The,
floor next to a potted plant and just typing away like
the
nothing was that like
conference,
yeah.
as I say, the conference scene has changed drastically, because it's scaled up so much now. There's so much attention on it, and there's so many different events. I'm sure it was more so like a meetup type phase where you're just getting folks interested in the space together for happy hour drinks before it really scaled up to a real full blown conference. Um, so it's neat to see the dichotomy between the two.
Yeah, and I think, it was only in the places that had big hubs of people that were interested, right? So Silicon
Mm-hmm.
Valley, New York City, those were the places where the bigger events were taking place. So I went to like my first conference was in San Francisco in June of 2014, and uh, I met a lot of really great people, a lot of early builders, and then 20 was it 20? Yeah, I guess it was like April of 2015 was when I launched um, CoinStructive, the first I mean, initially. The business model has changed multiple times since then, but CoinStructive has been around since 2015. So we're in the 10-year mark. I can't believe it's been 10 years.
It's a
It's
big deal when it comes to crypto. That's
yeah,
a
it feels
long
like
life
100.
cycle. I mean, you don't see many companies. Um, they come and go when it comes in the crypto space. So you guys are definitely hanging around, one of the veterans. But that's a great segue into let's dive into CoinStructive. So what are you guys doing today? What's the company focused on, and kind of the core operations, if you will?
Yeah, so we've we've changed. I laugh because the business models have changed multiple times, and that's how you really know like if your business is working. If you go into a bear market and you can't make any money, then your business model isn't any good,
Yep.
right? You got to be able to make money during the bear and the bull. Everybody can make money during a bull run. There's so much opportunity. It's when the money dries up, that's when you've really got to make sure that your business model is on point. But what we're doing now, or offering now, are two main services, really, and we're a service provider. We provide. So I started a Bitcoin ATM company in 2017 with some folks, and I ended up leaving in 2018. The company is still around. They're not really doing much, and I think it was a good idea to leave. But the point, the point being was that I became the chief compliance officer because one, no one else would do it, and two, I knew people in the space that were already chief compliance officers. So I was kind of like, well, if there's anybody in this group that's gonna be able to get this job done, it's gonna be me because I have people I can lean on for information and advice, right? So that's how I kind of looked at it, and um, and so after I left, I didn't really have that work anymore, but eventually I took another job, and then I started tr treating it as a fractional role because most people don't need a full-time compliance officer. And and it turned out that was really what the market needed at the time. There was a bunch of people with this in the startup space with low revenue, but it's a legal requirement to have a compliance officer. And usually the CEO starts out as like the compliance officer, but over time, there tends to be a conflict of interest in that position because the CEO and the other C-suites are trying to grow the business and increase the revenue, whereas the compliance officer is looking at the bad guys or potential bad guys and saying, that guy can't do any more business, that guy can't transact. So imagine a CEO, right? A CEO is going to be like, yeah, just let it all through. Like, we're making money. Like, who cares, right? Um, so to have a CEO who's the chief compliance officer, it doesn't really bode well with the regulators because they know there's a conflict of interest. So it's kind of like separation of power. And that way the compliance officer can come in and say, these are the things that need to be done. These are the things we're already doing. And here's where we can clean things up and make things better for your business so we don't have to worry. While trying to, also allow the most revenue to come in as possible. And that's always the tough battle doing compliance. But we service companies like Bitcoin ATM companies. We service, wallet providers who are now selling crypto directly. All right, so maybe they were just a wallet, but now they got a bunch of users, and it makes sense to have this. We are our own little exchange. Um, Payment providers, so people who are using crypto backend rails to like allow people to do remittances and things like that. Um, some other interesting business models that I can't really talk about, but like basically if it involves the movement of fiat currency and the conversion into crypto, that's usually where we sit in. So if you're building a business, right, and you're in that space where you're touching customers' funds, there's a lot of regulation around that, and it's constantly changing, which is actually the most difficult part because it's not the same across the board. All 50 states have like their own different money transmitter licensing rules. Some of them have crypto involved, and some of them don't. Um, so it makes it really difficult for a business operator or a CEO to figure out, well, what do I even need? And then even if I figure out what do I need, how expensive is it going to be to accomplish all those things? Maybe I need to do it in like chunks or pieces to make it more digestible for the company and go after what's the biggest markets. Because the overhead sometimes to get into those markets can be rather large, right?
On that client side, I mean, you're also helping kind of straddles the regulatory aspect as well with certain applications. The first thing that comes to mind, you mentioned payment processors like MTL, money transmitter licensing process. You assist your clients working through that process as well, right?
Yeah, we do money transmitter licensing. It kind of came about organically as part of the compliance work because you can imagine client comes to you um, and says, "Hey, I heard the laws," or you tell them, "Hey, the laws just changed in one of the states you're operating. Looks like we're gonna need to get a license, or we have to shut down operations by this date." Right? So then people are like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?" And most of the time, the people who are providing money transmitter licensing services are attorneys. So people I constantly get asked if I'm an attorney all the time. Um, and that's also because of the other business line that we operate in, which is investigations, right? So not to cut the money transmitter licensing thing too short, but it's a lot of paperwork and regulatory overhead. It's bureaucracy at its finest. I mean, because some of the states you can reuse the information and some of the states you can't. So a lot of times it's duplicative. And it can get very costly because there's things like the two biggest thing that people don't realize about money transmitter licensing that we can move on is there's there's it is really outside of the company's control too. It is what's called audited financial statements. So you need a CPA to actually give their stamp of approval that they audited every single dollar that came in and every dollar that went out, and they know exactly and they can account for everything because that's a requirement. Audited financials are a requirement for money transmitters, and you have to do this in some states quarterly after the first one, and they can ask you to go back 2 or 3 years. Right. So the problem is that a startup may not have clean books going back 2 or 3 years, and there's no way they can get audited financials. And they're really expensive. They can be 50 to over 100 grand to get audited financials. So it's a really steep burden. And then the second thing is net worth and surety bonds. So a lot of times your company has to have at least a minimum net worth before they'll even let you operate in a certain state. So you might have to have a $500,000 or $250,000 of assets, and crypto can't be part of that. Like if you had $200,000 in crypto, right? You can't even like put that on the books. Um, so there's this whole thing like about the accounting practices that go into this, and they're actually trying to change the laws right now to allow folks to use that because it's technically what's called an intangible asset, crypto. And so the problem is that you can't put that on your balance sheet for net worth. So you might be sitting on $1 million in crypto, and it may fluctuate, it might go up and down, but it probably hasn't been below a half a million, but you can't use it at all, right? So that's where some of the laws need to change around
Couple
this.
things to just a couple things to touch on there really quickly because you made a lot of great points. We've worked with a lot of companies that are going through the MTL process and need audited financial statements as a CPA firm, and that is something that does come up in the 11th hour that they're just trying to get to the finish line, and then understanding the audit process it takes time. So it's one of those things that it's tough to get out in front of. It's costly, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
Um, Another thing that we've seen a lot is companies that are creating effectively shells or subsidiaries as the company that is submitting the MTL license. So there's not all that much operations from an accounting perspective. So it helps streamline both the application side as well as the audit requirement, right? Because there's not that much there to audit. Um,
yeah,
so just to,
that's a great tactic, and I tell people that too. Like, look, it might be easier to spin up a subsidiary or a new entity that's clean because then there are no financials to audit.
or it takes
It's
a week to get done, right? You get that stamp of approval because there's not much there. It's a cash account, right?
Yep,
At the end of the
yeah,
day. So, and
there are
then you
workarounds, exactly.
yeah, you mentioned the bureaucracy. Love that word for kind of some of these licensing requirements. And I always come back to the entire bit license requirement here in the state of New York and just the paperwork, the cost that goes involved with that, with only here in New York. I think that needs to be scrapped immediately. Um, I'm hoping under the current administration, that's one of the action items or under the crypto task force that we start to make some progress there because that's one of those things that it's very archaic, I feel like, and it's just
And
creating
you might
extra
have to
hurdles
get
for companies to transact in the state of New York.
and you might have to get the money transmitter license on top of the bit license. You have to
Yep.
get both sometimes depending on your business model.
Yeah.
So it's like double duty in New York. And it's not like these application processes are easy. Um, they're very time consuming. And it's actually that's the hardest part is the time consuming aspect of putting it all together. Like if anybody's ever bought a home, right, and all the paperwork that goes into buying a home, and how long it takes, you're like, oh, give me your bank statements, and then, oh, we need this, and then we need these documents, and it's like the same thing, and it's for every officer. So, you know, and any person who has like managerial like responsibility, there's all these like weird definitions. I'm actually skipping the NMLS conference this year. Just I've gone every year for the last like 4 years. And I do learn a lot of stuff, but I've noticed that the NMLS conference, which is where all of the licensing is kind of held, like that's the portal. That's the National Mortgage Licensing System. I think that's what it stands for, right? But it's everything. It's lenders, it's the mortgage people, it's this huge umbrella. So the money services businesses like the PayPals, the Squares, the even the Geminis, the Krakens,
Yep.
right? Those kinds of businesses when they're playing in that space and going to conferences like that, you kind of get lost in the shuffle. There's a much better conference that's kind of held at the end of in the fall, similar um, business line of target audience. But it's just MSBs, so it's just money service businesses. So you don't get all the loan people, you don't get all the mortgage people, right? You get just the MSBs, and you get a lot of crypto folks there, a lot more. So, and it's a smaller group. So the NMLS conference, a couple thousand people show up. It's usually really big. Um, it's multiple days. The MSB conference is usually 2 days, and there's like 400 people probably. And you get to meet the regulators. That's always one of the best things. So you get to go in
Yeah.
if you got a state you're talking to, you go get to meet a person, like you can talk to them. So you can actually get things done.
Good.
Um, But yeah, the surety bonds, the other thing on the money transmitter licenses that people don't realize is that you need surety bonds. Surety bonds are basically an insurance so that you can, if you wrap up, if the things don't go well in that state or something happens, you have this money that you can use to like settle the situation. Um, and each state needs its own. So, and they have their own requirements. So some states it's like 20 grand. Some states it's 250 grand, right? So it's just like then there's these surety bond providers, and you have to get a bond you have to renew your bond every year. So it's just kind of like a bail bond. It's like you pay a percentage, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the total value of the bond, and then they issue you the bond, and it's good for a year, and then you have to renew. So if it costs you $5,000 for one state, imagine getting all 50 states, right? Like it starts to add
It's
up
not practical.
and exponentially. So you have to be very targeted in what you do, where you go, and where you're spending your money, because it's really easy to just throw money out the window and not see any return on it while you're dealing with all this regulatory burden.
Um, no, I think that was great. I mean, I think one area I definitely want to also pick your brain on and learn more about is on the, you mentioned it earlier, investigative and forensic side. And that's kind of where
Yeah,
we originally crossed paths was we had certain cases come to us about divorce proceedings. Um,
yeah.
and I know you said the business model's changed, adapted over time, but I'm curious your experiences there on that front and how you're assisting customers or clients. I don't want to throw the word fraud out there, but on the investigation side, right? On some of the forensic analysis that you guys do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, it does encompass both sides of things, right? So, um, investigations can be, you can look into something fraudulent, or you can look into something that's non-criminal, like like a divorce case, right? So, I started out doing blockchain forensics because I had a continuing education initiative that I started back in like 2018, I want to say, as a an additional business model that I was trying to get off the ground. It's education is tough, right? It's a really tough go in this industry because education should mostly be free. But I realized there are folks who pay for education every year because they need continuing education. So I targeted banking compliance professionals, lawyers in the financial space, and um, oh wait, what was the third one? Banking compliance. Oh, and law enforcement. And so those three categories I had courses for, and I was building. I even had a course that I built for the state of California that got certified to train law enforcement. I couldn't even get anybody to take the class. I couldn't get anybody to even show up to this free class. Um, But because of that, and I had a partnership with a blockchain forensics company, they were allowing me to use their tools as part of the demo. Then all of a sudden, they started sending me victims, and I was like, "What the heck?" Like, the first rule of crypto is if you sent your crypto to somebody, it's gone. There's no getting it back. And I was like, "Well, what are these people doing? Like the money's gone." And then I started realizing sometimes it's more about knowing what happened and getting some peace of mind to have somebody help you confirm that, like, yeah, the money really is gone. And here's what happened to it. Because at the end of the day, closure is a really important thing for people when they're dealing with being scammed or being a victim. So that's kind of how the business model started. And so we do investigations a little bit different, I think, than a lot of other firms. Because I wanted it to be something that people weren't throwing a lot of good money after bad. Right? That's what a lot of people would say. I was like, well, how do I? There's no guarantee. I always tell people, there's no guarantee we can get your money back, right? And people think the first thing they say to us is, if you can get my money back, like I know that everything is going to be okay, right? But that's also a little bit diluted and delusional, right? Because if you're in a relationship and you've withdrawn a majority of the funds out of the savings account and lost it, the trust has already been broken, right? Like getting the money back and putting it in the account is not going to fix the relationship and the trust. So people need to think bigger picture about what they just got themselves into and how long it's actually going to take to recover, right? So to speak, because it's not just about recovering the funds always, right? And there's a lot of recovery scams out there. Like the number for the longest time, uh, the biggest recovery scam was the number one advertiser on Google. So you typed in, how do I get my crypto back? Or my crypto was stolen, what do I do? And the first company that would pop up was a scam. And they were spending tens of thousands of dollars on ads because they were charging a single person $10,000 to get started. Just flat, 10K, we'll figure out what happened to you, we'll get your money back. And then it was just a process of lies upon lies and deceit. To the point where they would then show somebody, hey, we found your money, it's sitting in this wallet, check this out. All you need to do is pay us 10% of that fund so we can release it to you. Another scam, right? So, it's part of it is people don't understand how crypto works, right? And they're trusting. So that's the only one of the real good things that about doing the investigation work is how many trusting people that are still out there. Right? There's a lot of good people, and they made bad choices, or they trusted someone and got duped, right, into believing that what they were going to be doing was real. But go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's funny because this isn't a crypto only event, right? You have a lot of this in the traditional finance world as well with bad actors at the end of the day. So it's not just siloed to this industry. But at the end of the day, it's some of these transactions are immutable, right? They're non-reversible. So it's a matter of trying to track them down. And I'm curious, some of your maybe success stories, if you will, if you've had any around that piece of recovering funds or showing clients kind of what happened, because it does become a web of just tangled transactions sometimes on the blockchain.
The hardest part about investigations is the inability to recover. Um, Most people think, oh, well, I'm going to be able to get my money back at some point. And we have to be very honest with people, right? Because if you don't get your money back in the first 6 months, you're either likely not to get any back, or it's going to be multiple years, um, like 3 to 5. And that's because that's how long law enforcement takes, right? They have to go through all their legal processes, and they may even we've had a couple cases where the people have been told we have money for you, and then it's sitting at the I think with the marshals, U.S. Marshals, or somebody else, but they won't release it, and it's been over a year, and this guy's waiting on like 120 grand, I think, or 114 grand to come back to him. They haven't given it back to him yet. The case is done. Like everything is done, but they won't release the funds. And it's like, I don't understand. He doesn't understand. And we can't get any real answers out of anybody, right? So even a win sometimes feels like a loss.
Yeah.
Um, so, and that's part of the reason why I'm working on a nonprofit that does the same thing. So because CoinStructive, right, the investigation work is great, and the reason why we do it in these 2 stages too. I wanted to get to that is because there's what we call the initial analysis step, which is like if you had taken your car because it's making some weird noise or leaking some fluid to the mechanic. If the mechanic doesn't open the hood and just looks at the outside of the car and says it's going to be probably 3 grand to do the work, you'd probably be like, wait, what? How do you even know what's wrong with the car? Like, you didn't look under the hood. Like, you have no idea what's going on. How do you know it's going to be 3 grand? What if it's the windshield wiper housing, right? It's like a $200 part and like an hour for him to put it in. And it might be $300 or $400 max. Rather than who knows what is going on under there, right? So
Just
what we,
throwing a general figure out there.
yeah, oh, it's going to be 6 grand. That looks like a transmission leak, like, wait, how do you know? You'd take it to someplace else and you'd get a second opinion. Crypto, though, there's not a lot of companies, and it's not exactly easy to find somebody, one that you can trust. So you go with the first guy that you find, usually, right? But they may be ripping you off. So we always do it in two stages so that you get this like estimate of what actually happened and whether it's even worth going after, right? Because the outcomes, we call them the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There's the three things that can really happen out of it after you look and see, you look under the hood. The money either went someplace that it's likely to be recoverable, like an exchange that will cooperate with your law enforcement or allow us to freeze the funds long enough so that they can be recovered, or you get like a what we call the bad, which is like a place where the company like may not cooperate. It could be an exchange in China or in the Seychelles, and they don't have any real responsibility, or they don't feel a sense of responsibility to their customers, and they're not really going to help, especially anybody in the U.S. So the second part, or the third part, is the ugly, which could be things like mixers and tumblers and super complicated. They break them up into like 1,000 small transactions. Like it's not probably worth the time and the money to do the investigation, knowing how bad and how ugly it is. So, but this is enough sometimes to give people that peace of mind of, okay, well, the money really is gone, right? They did a really good job, or were they sloppy and the money's like sitting in this wallet still and it hasn't moved? We can watch those and we can say, oh, it moved. It's moving again. Oh, it just hit an exchange today. Let's try to go get it. Right. So, um, so there is a difference, right, on how we do things because we want people to know upfront what they're getting themselves into. Plus, for us, the people who are going to end up building a report, a blockchain forensic report at the end of the day with images and annotations showing the flow of funds and what actually happened to the money, that that step is more time consuming. So if we can do the first step, then we know exactly how long the second step of building the report is going to take. So we can give somebody an accurate quote on how much it's going to cost rather than some arbitrary number. And people will just be like, oh, yeah, I guess we'll go with you. Here's $5,000. Here's $10,000. Um, I never felt like that was fair to the victims or to the individuals. So, but it's basically investigations is half victim work, which actually complements the compliance work because on the compliance side, people don't tell you what they're trying to do when they're trying to get around your controls and the things that you have in place to stop fraud. But the people who have been scammed come to you and they tell you everything. So it makes when you do your compliance work, it makes it much stronger because you can ask the questions because you understand how the person got scammed in the first place, right? So they definitely help each other. But on the other side of the investigations is things like you mentioned earlier, the expert witness work, which is really starting to pick up because if you think about it, every year that crypto goes around and doesn't disappear, more people put in their portfolios. But people are still getting divorced at the same rates they always have, right?
Yeah, that's not going away anytime soon.
So we're also working on things like bankruptcy receivership. So companies who put crypto on the balance sheet, they got to figure out what do they got to do with that, right? Or they took it as investment and now the company is dissolving. Where did that money go and what is the waterfall? Like who gets paid back and where are their assets hiding potentially, right? Um, was it laundered, right? Like did it go out of business or go bankrupt because they stole the money, right? Like those are all really, and so that's why investigations is actually pretty fun, right? Like it sucks to having to deal with the victims because of what they're experiencing, right? But I like helping them because at the end of the day, they feel like someone is actually taking a stand to help them, which is part of the problem with the whole like victim journey, right? And if people aren't familiar with the victim journey, what happens is after you realize you've been scammed, right? This whole triggers go off in your head, and you're like, holy shit, what have I been doing for the last 3 months? I need to figure this. I need to get help now, right? And in your whole mindset changes, and like panic sets. Um, But you know, the 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 investigation, like at the end of the day, right? Like you really just want to make sure that people get good, solid information so that they can make informed decisions about how to proceed. So that's part of the reason why I'm starting a nonprofit that's doing this, because there's a lot of people who can't afford private investigation services. They may have only lost 50 grand, but that was their entire life savings, right?
Yeah, it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Each individual.
So I'm launching a nonprofit called the Crypto Recovery Alliance. I've been
Hmm.
working on it since October of 23. Last year was a lot of paperwork and trying to get things aligned. And we're waiting for our nonprofit status to come back from the IRS so that we can kind of officially open the doors and start bringing in the donations that we need to operate. But I'm excited about it because it does three main things. It's going to provide no-cost blockchain forensics investigations for victims who qualify financially, so that like the guy who loses $1 million and comes to us and says, "I lost everything. I might have to sell my second house." And go, I don't know if you need free services. Like, you still have money, right? It's the other guy who's living now paycheck to paycheck, has no saving, right? That's the person who's going to get the help. But the other two things that we're going to offer, I think, are just as important, because the investigation is definitely a key component. But like what I mentioned about getting people uh, the help that they need to recover holistically, right? That is, that's going to stem from access to low or no cost mental health care. Because you can't just process the trauma of being a victim yourself, right? Especially the bigger the loss, or the more traumatic the loss, because that sends people into like this downward spiral, right? Of negativity. They stop eating well. They not sleeping at night. Their adult children aren't talking to them anymore. They get a divorce. Their performance at work goes down. They lose their job. They become depressed, isolated, and suicidal, right? And it's just this cascade. And this all stemmed from like a scammer, right? Building this confidence with them, having a relationship, and then pulling the rug out from under. And if we can save one life, I feel like it's all worth it.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, and it's a great compliment to what you are already doing and in the space of. I think they go perfectly hand in hand. And I think a lot of people are going to benefit from this. It's an unfortunate circumstance and something, nature of the beast within the industry. But like I said, it's not just a crypto thing. I think this is just a human issue, nature of doing business. But I think a lot of people are going to benefit from the work that you and your company are doing.
And then thank you. And the last thing that we're going to be offering is this preventative education aspect. Because, like I mentioned, like, people get into this like tunnel vision, and that's all they can see is like what's right in front of them and the
Hmm.
immediacy. And um, a lot of those people end up falling scam victim again. They become repeat victims because they never learned what the signs were to spot a scam, or when they're being retargeted. Because the scammer doesn't care. Like, they will sell your information on the web so that somebody else, because they know they got everything out of you they could right now, but someone might hit you up in a year, right? And if they get $500 or $1,500 out of you, that might be enough for them to live for 3, 4, 5 months in another country. But we don't really know exactly what their motivation is. Some of the people that are doing the scams are held against their will. Like, that's where we've gotten to the point now where, like, even the scammers aren't necessarily the bad guys. It's like the bad guys forcing good guys to scam good guys. And it's like, it's such a psychological mind, like, tease. Like, you just, you just don't even really know, like, who's the bad guy anymore.
No, there's a lot of interesting stuff, and you see a lot of interesting scenarios, which I think, like you mentioned, keeps you coming back, right? It's again, it's unfortunate some of the situations you come across, but it's fun to help people. You get enjoyment out of
It's
like
rewarding.
seeing, yeah, rewarding, I should say, yeah, um, seeing people made whole at the end of the day. So I think that's very important. Um, No, we touched on a lot of good stuff here. I think where can folks go to learn more about CoinStructive as well as the nonprofit?
So for the nonprofit, you can visit cryptorecoveryalliance.org. We do also have a LinkedIn page on the Crypto Recovery Alliance, and um, we're looking for volunteers right now. So we're in the process of trying to get things squared away. So we're really looking for someone who can help potentially on the fundraising side. So anybody who has a background with fundraising. And we're also looking for volunteers on the investigation side. So we are going to need to ramp up people. And that could be anything from like doing intake calls a couple hours a week to actually performing investigation work. And then I am still looking for somebody who can help with the mental health side of things to kind of help push that in the right direction. Because I think one of the other things I'd like to do is provide not just access, but also like group therapy setting, right? So that the victims can talk and hear about what other people are going through and experiencing. And that'll make them not feel so alone and that they're so isolated and this is only happening to them. And because the first thing people normally do is they blame themselves. They're like, how could I be so stupid, right? And I wanted to also bring up the point that you mentioned earlier about how the scams are not new, right? Like it's the same scams. It's just they're using crypto as a means of moving the money around, right? But the thing about crypto is the dollar value of those scams are usually a lot higher, right? It's not the same as the gift card scam where they're going and getting 500 or $1,000. We're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? Millions of dollars people are losing. People aren't losing boatloads of money like that to like regular scammers, right? So it's it's less people, but much more value is being lost, right? So on the constructive side, if you're looking for investigation work or you're looking for compliance services, you can visit coinstructive.com. And we have a couple surveys on the site. So like if you're looking for compliance, great. There's a button right on the first page if you want to open a case. And we always do free consultation. So you fill out the survey. As long as you have lost over 10K, you'll qualify and we'll get you an email that will be automatically sent out to you so you can book an appointment to talk to an intake counselor. And they will explain to you all the steps and the process that we go through in the investigation. And that way you can be informed enough to decide if it's something that you want to actually do and how much it might cost to get you there. So you can also follow us on Twitter at CoinStructive. I'm on Twitter as well at DJKINKLE. That was my my college DJ name, and
I love it.
I never thought Twitter would take off, but I decided that it's a little too late to change it.
Yeah, crypto
So
Twitter's the place to be, man.
but the good thing is there's not a lot of Groshongs out there in the
Yep.
world, so it's pretty easy to find me directly. I think there's only one other Chris Groshong in the entire world, so
Well, that's awesome, Chris. I appreciate you joining us today. We learned a lot of good stuff about CoinStructive, and now we know where to go to learn more and chat with yourself and your colleagues. So thank you for joining us today, and appreciate the time.
thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure being here.
Awesome. That wraps up another episode of Cryptonomics. Thanks, everyone.